I'm very grateful to be here with all of you. It's just so delightful to see and meet
Recording in progress.
All these new faces. And I'm very grateful for this little step I could stand on. So thank you. So before we begin, I'd like to just take a moment. Well, first I want to recognize everyone on Zoom and everyone in the room. I'd like to begin by taking a moment to recognize the indigenous peoples whose land we stand upon. And here in Long Island, it is the Shinnecock Nation, and I'd like to offer gratitude and reverence to them during this service. So our topic today is thought, as it is this month, and the title of this talk, of this message, is Building an Inside-Out Life. Life is difficult. Anybody agree? You can raise your hand, and I could see you in Zoom land in my heart, yes, and some nodding. Well, if you're a spiritual searcher like me, you're probably familiar with that opening phrase from M. Scott Peck's very well-known, best-selling book, The Road Less Traveled. And this was the book to read back in the 80s and 90s. And the reason Peck began his book with that line is that he felt that much of our suffering and unhappiness came from our not expecting life to be difficult. So many of us live our life expecting it to be like a smooth pond of water, perfectly still, no ripples, no disruptions, just peace. And when the ripples come, we're challenged. Why are there ripples in my pond? Why is there rain going on in my pond? Why is the wind disrupting my beautiful pond? Everybody else's pond is smooth and beautiful and peaceful. Look at the people on TV and the movies. Their life is smooth. Their pond is smooth. We don't expect disruption. We don't want disruption. We are resistant to whatever it is that disrupts our ponds, our lives, our plans. We resist what we don't want, whether it's a job change, a relationship coming to an end, an argument, not being in the relationship we want to be in, the death of a loved one, needing a knee replacement, hip replacement, or cancer treatment. We may even resist our own aging. I can say that for me, many of those things I just mentioned have caused me pain and struggling in my life. Not all of them, but several of them. And I fought them tooth and nail. There's a well-known Buddhist phrase and equation that goes like this: resistance equals suffering. I see some heads nodding. It's something I try to keep in the forefront of my mind as I struggle through my life. The occurrences of our life that upsets us are the seeds of our suffering. That upset us are the seeds of our suffering. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be upset about the terrible events or disappointments of our life. We're human, and that's part of our experience. But the extent of our experience of suffering is not determined by the events. It's determined by how we experience it within ourselves. It's determined by our thoughts. There's a couplet from the Dharmapada. If you're familiar with the Dharmapada, it is the Buddhist wisdom teachings that illustrates this beautifully, and it's called the Twin Verses. And these are the two verses. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Suffering follows an evil thought as the wheels of a cart follow the oxen that draw it. And you could change the word evil to challenging or resistant thought. Our life, this is part 2, our life is shaped by our minds. We become what we think. Hatred and anger cannot put an end to hatred and anger. Joy follows a pure thought like a shadow that never leaves us. Our life is shaped by our minds. We become what we think. A simple teaching, right? So let's just think differently and change our lives. Like this, right? We'll just change it, easy enough. And then our lives will be pain-free. There will be no more difficulty or suffering. It'll all disappear. There we go. But how in the world do we do it? How do we change it? How do we lessen the pain from the experience inside that we experience from the events that happen to us? How do we change the inside experience? How do we stop the cycle of suffering? There was a time in my life when I spent suffering. I mean, really suffering. I was very depressed and profoundly anxious. There were events going on that I couldn't change, and I was in rough shape. And I couldn't quiet what felt like the endless dialogue inside myself. I was really struggling. And during those years, I used to attend retreats by myself at a place called Pumpkin Hollow Farm. Has anybody ever heard of Pumpkin Hollow Farm? Well, this place was run by the Theosophical Society up in Hudson Valley in that area of New York. And one of the things I loved about it is that it wasn't aligned to any one spiritual tradition. It was very inclusive of everyone. And I had signed up for a retreat in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh. Does anybody, do you know of Thich Nhat Hanh, most of you? He is a Buddhist monk and leader and teacher, and probably second to the Dalai Lama known in the world. And I've read his books, and I've always loved his work. So I thought, oh, this will be great. I'll go off on this retreat. It'll be nice. I'll get away from my home. I'll have some time with like-minded people. We'll have conversations, breakout groups, that sort of thing. I'll have a little place to stay, vegetarian food. This will be good for me. I figured it could be a good escape. I arrived there to find all the attendees were Buddhists in formal practice with 20 hours a day of noble silence. Okay, so, and if I was to, and meditation and just going in completely, and if I was to remain there, I had to follow their practice of meditation and noble silence for 4 full days. So, and I had read a lot about Buddhist practice, and I had tried to meditate, and it just didn't work well for me. So I'm like, oh my God, this is the hardest choice. Now, what should I do? What's worse than staying home in the house I want to be away from? This might be worse. So I was very resistant to this experience, but I was struggling. So I said, all right, I give up. I'm going to hang out here for 24 hours. I'll turn off my phone. And if I can't take it after 24 hours, I'll leave. And so I stayed. I gave in. And to my surprise, the longer I stayed with these gentle people who were being quiet and actually bringing my attention inside myself, the better I felt. My anxiety lessened, my pain softened. Being there did not change the problems in my life, but it changed me. After 4 days, I had settled into a different relationship with my inner self, one I had never known, one I had never taken the time to meet. I, like many people, didn't like the idea of being in silence, because that would make me meet the suffering inside me. That would make me have to sit with it. So I was afraid of it. But somehow I changed after that 4-day weekend. It changed me and it changed my life. It set me off on a trajectory to have the courage to go inside and meet my discomfort head on. And by going within, I found my peace. And I also found my open heart, a heart that was more open than I could imagine it could be. And I realized if I wanted to change my experience outside, I had to change my experience inside. After that weekend, I understood that we live two lives, a life that is outside us, where we interact with the world, our jobs, our relationships, our families, and also an inner life where we feel and we think. We think approximately 60,000 thoughts a day. No wonder we're tired. Those thoughts drive our lives, sometimes to our benefit and sometimes to our detriment. The Buddhists call this the monkey mind, the mind that jumps from one thought to another. We all know that mind, right? It wakes us up at 4 a.m. and won't let us go back to sleep. You've all met that mind. Our inner life, though, is our companion as well. It is not just the part of us that struggles, it's also where we know love and where we know peace. It is the lens through which we see our existence. It's inside. Humans are always trying to quiet that discomfort within ourselves, whether we do it intentionally or unintentionally. The unintentional ways could be shopping, eating, drugs, alcohol, getting lost in our devices, or doing something that does not serve us, something that mindlessly takes us away from ourselves. We know addiction is a distraction from what feels uncomfortable within us. Now, I'm not saying we have to stop eating and shopping and watching Netflix. I just paid for my $20 membership yesterday. But to develop an awareness of where we get lost is very, very helpful to us all. Advertising in a consumer society, all our Western societies are, they engage us to feel lack sometimes, to engage us to feel lack. And that is part of discomfort, and that lack is, it encourages us to buy the Band-Aid rather than be it. I think the spiritual invitation in question today is how might we intentionally quiet that inside ourselves. So if we want to change our experience outside, it comes by shifting our experience inside. Scientific studies of neuroplasticity show that when we meditate, we are in effect changing the shape of our brains by flexing the muscle of attention. And there are many ways to flex this muscle of attention in addition to meditation. And I'd like to share with you now several options to consider or to bring into your life to help you build an inside-out life. So first, give your mind a rest. Every major religion and spiritual tradition has practices that are intended to slow the pattern of our thinking mind, to quiet us inside. It's interesting. If you really look, you'll see it everywhere. So here are some. As we know, the Buddhists meditate, and the Catholics use rosary beads. Christians sing songs of call and response. Hindus chant, they do yoga, they recite mantras, and have kirtans. Anybody ever go to a kirtan? They are fabulous. It's a great way to be in community and to quiet inside. Muslims have the 5-time-a-day salat prayer, the body prayer. And in Judaism, we have davening. And there's also, during Shabbat services, you'll often find singing songs of call and response that we get quiet from. I know most of us here don't fall into the more traditional religious container. And also, there are loads of apps out there. Most of you might have heard of Insight Timer. It's on, you can download it for free on your phone, and there are a plethora of ways that you can use these practices to quiet inside. There's also Calm, and there's Headspace. Now, Headspace also has, here we go back to Netflix, it has several different shows on Netflix that will help and teach you how to meditate. Thank you. And they also have some that teach you and help you to fall asleep. So I know I struggle with that sometimes, especially with that 4 a.m. wake-up call. So the second option for building an inside-out life is to be intentionally grateful. Every morning, the first words I say or the first words I think when I'm clear is thank you, God. Thank you for another day and for a healthy body. It's a privilege to be alive. And, so easily you get caught up in what you don't have, what is missing in our lives. And every morning we have that opportunity, or any time during our day, to stop and say, wow, I just got back from South Africa, honestly, and I was visiting with a friend and just realizing the suffering for so many, and the simple things that we have here, like electricity, that we know we could flip the switch every day, or the power goes out 4 times a day in Cape Town, 3 times a day in Cape Town for 4 hours at a time. And that's just, unless you have the money to have a generator. And that's just how people live. And I came home and said, oh my God, that I could let my water run to wash my dishes, or I can turn on a light. Simple things. And also seeing how much abundance and comforts we have in our life. Sometimes it's hard to see how much we do have, how many comforts we do have. The thing about our brains and the way it works, we can't be grateful and think we are in lack at the same time. Our brains can't hold 2 opposing thoughts. So you can't feel gratitude and lack simultaneously. You can't feel joy and sorrow simultaneously. This does not necessarily quiet our mind, but it certainly redirects it to a positive place, or a place where that spinning slows down. And the final would be to try a mindfulness practice. Mindfulness has endless ways to be practiced, as we did today. The most common practice is to become aware of our breathing, and I think you're all familiar with these practices. When we pay attention to our breathing, we can't think, strangely enough, you can't think and fully pay attention to your breath moving in and out of your body. So as we practice our breathing, within usually a few seconds, a thought will pop in. And when we witness that thought, we become aware of where our power is going, and we gently bring our attention back to our breath. When we pay attention to our thoughts and we do these breath practices, these mindfulness practices, something extraordinary happens. We begin to move away from reacting to the events in our life to responding. The thing about these practices is the more often that we do them, the more our experience begins to shift, the more this becomes natural within us. Mindfulness practice doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be a long session of formal sitting meditation in a lotus position. I know I can't get in that lotus position anymore. But it can be done while we're walking, or weeding our garden, or even washing our dishes. Just paying our full attention to what we're doing. Just as exercise helps us to take care of our bodies, mindfulness is a skill that helps our minds. Just as we could build our muscles by going to the gym, with mindfulness, we could build the muscle of our inner experience, of our inner life, as we as we go through regular practice. So, since that trip to Pumpkin Hollow Farm, which was 16 years ago, my life has changed. Mostly due to the change in my relationship with my thoughts. From that time forward, I've kept a mindfulness practice. For me, taking time every day to pay attention to my thoughts, to sit with my inner life, has changed my whole life. It's changed the way I relate to other people. It's changed how I respond to the events around me. So just 6 months after my trip to Pumpkin Hollow, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And all those practices that I just talked about before helped me through that experience. It helped me through where I would have struggled. Not that I didn't struggle, I'm saying, just to be honest, there was struggles. But this experience for me would have been so much more difficult had I not brought those experiences into my life. And between the two things, they all brought me forward into ministry. Between this experience of mindfulness and having this cancer experience. Just, oh, by the way, how God is always involved too. I just wanted to mention how perfect that was, what divine order that was, that I ended up at Pumpkin Hollow Farm just 6 months before that happened in my life. And when I returned there, when I returned there a year later, I sat with the 2 women that accompanied me my first time at Pumpkin Hollow. And when I told them what had happened, they were both breast cancer survivors as well. So I said, I get it. The divine order of it all, how I was being held, was just extraordinary. So since then, I've gone into remission, and I've become a minister, and I spend my life doing what I can to help people through suffering. Having an awareness of what's going on within us provides us the space to choose how to respond rather than react to the events around us. Life is difficult, and whatever we could do to find the tools to grow our hearts and soften our thoughts, we could then offer the best of ourselves to our own lives and to the lives of those around us. Thank you, and may it be so.